flakes or the sleet, whatever it may be. But these embers act just like snowflakes, right? They'll find some place and they'll start accumulating. And so one ember may not do it, but if there's 10 or 20 or 100 that start collecting over here in the corner, or you'll just start, in fact, you can already see it right here. Enough embers have landed on that pine straw, bam, and all of a sudden you've got a flame, right? So another thing you may have, while I'm thinking about it, right, you may be in your house, you've done all this, you've reduced all the fuel loads around your home. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll think about that here in a minute. So anyways, all of a sudden here we've got this flame on top of the house. And all these, and this isn't uncommon, right? All these embers. It's 2 ignitions here. This one starts, really taking off. You can kind of, here in a minute you see the gutters behave differently. One's a metal gutter, one's a vinyl gutter. I mean, obviously they're going to behave differently. There it is falling off. Here, this is got the concrete sideboard. Here's where you can start to see that vortex behavior. Again, all that pine straw in the gutter. Oh, here. So again, the asphalt shingles, Class A. Excellent roof. That's going to work very well. So this is that asphalt roof, and all that material is actually not penetrating the roof, despite the significant flames on there. But over here, right, we had that vegetation. You have this corner. It creates the eddy effect, and you have a pretty significant flame there. Obviously, that's going to ignite the house. So this next one's again 2 different sightings, 2 different. Okay, now it's fully inflamed, right? So actually, it's hard to see, right? But you can just barely make out, right, the gable there. Right up there in the top, right, there's a vent up there, like almost all homes, either in the soffits or the eaves or up there. There's a vent, and this has a screen on it and the holes are 1/8 of an inch. Hardwire mesh cloth. In a minute here, there's going to be a camera inside the attic. So we've always got some Achilles heels on the outside of the house. But let's say you've taken care of all these things, and you're inside the house. You decided to stay and weather this storm. I may have gotten ahead of myself here. This just shows the 2 sidings, right? Here's the vinyl siding. Obviously, that's not holding up, whereas the cement-based is, and the 2 different gutters. So here's the attic gable with a 1/8 inch mesh wire screen. Again, so you're in your home, and all of a sudden, right? And this is the attic. You're not going to be able to see this. You can see all those embers coming in, right? And the attic's just full of things that are super dried out and ready to be combustible. And so all of a sudden, maybe you're outside fighting that fire and you turn around and your home's ablaze. Like, what happened? The fire front hasn't even showed up yet. It got in through the vents. So that's why I say it's really difficult to, will it survive embers? It's really hard. Here's some pictures. Clearly something's already gone inside this house. But here's the porch, right? An ember probably landed on that wood rocking chair, whatever it was. Here's the deck, right? This, around it, you can see it's not like it was a crown fire per se. Again, all these little Achilles heels, fire embers can get underneath that deck, and so forth. Here's some vents. This thing burns, and sure enough, it just sucks those embers right inside your home. And if enough of them get in there, it's a problem. So, again, will it survive embers? You can do things to help that, but that's a difficult proposition. Will it survive flames? For sure not. So here's these sort of zones. Here's your home. This 0 to 5 feet, I think, is the most important one. If you're not going to do anything else, think about that zone right in there, because if the flames do get to it, right, it's going to burn. But if you can keep them away, you'll increase your odds, and so forth. And the more work you do surrounding your house, reducing that vegetation, you may reduce some of the immediate embers, right? But again, up to, a quarter mile, half mile, whatever it be around your house, it's hard to get rid of all those. Those embers are eventually going to make it to your property. But this sort of approach will give you the best chance if you're if you get stuck, or if your home's, we call it defensible space, but really it's more like survivable space. Can your home survive if you're not there? Or if you get stuck there, right, you don't want to be having these flames breathing down on top of you. So I'm not going to go through all these, but right, roof, vents, windows, walls, decks, rain gutters, some of that is in that handout I gave you, and a lot of that is available online with all this sort of detail on what you can do. This is kind of where I talk about, right? Like you have a shake shingle roof, and you want a new roof, that gets pretty expensive. So that can be difficult to deal with. There's some maintenance things you can do, like getting all those pine needles off the roof. That would help. Patio covers, chimneys, garages, fence, access. So I'm not going to go through all these. 0 to 5 feet, obviously that's not going to be very good. This is going to fare a whole lot better. And it doesn't have to be like, obviously in New Mexico, well, it's the stucco house that kind of fits, but I mean, you could take this home and it wouldn't have to be a moonscape to reduce the risk. So here's some of those. So the IBHS is that's that video we were watching of that home. Again, they got some of the wind blowing, like what for hurricane stuff. It's kind of interesting. Firewise is a good one. It talks about kind of all those things we were just talking about. And there's different zones. What do I do? Fire adapted communities, ready, set, go. All those, and some of those links are in that publication that talks about those. In the back of that publication, there's 2 sections about what happens if I get stuck in my car and what happens if I get stuck in my house. And I won't go through those, but you can read those. Again, it's not really desirable. If you get stuck in your house or your car, there's some things you can do, that may help, but you may also perish. It's not, it's sort of like the best thing you can do versus, if you get stuck in that situation, here's a few things to think about. This is more for communities, but we developed a webpage after wildfire New Mexico. In fact, we're getting ready to put on another workshop for pre-fire planning for post-fire outcomes. This is more kind of dealing with post-fire treatments, but New Mexico kind of led the way. There's this really great website that is available. If your community or your home burns, you can go through these steps, these links that'll talk about, immediate safety, who can help, post-fire treatments, flood information, etc., financial tips. So that's kind of after the fire. Everything we talked about is kind of being prepared before the fire. So I will stop there and take any questions or comments that you may have. Well, there's my contact information. You're free to call me or email me. I've gone out to ranches before and we've looked at them, and homes, and tried to identify where the weaknesses are. What can you do to improve your odds if there's a fire, not only for you, for your ranch, financially, safety-wise.
So this is related so much to the safety side of it, but from the prescribed burn side of it, what would you recommend? Like when is it appropriate, and who to contact if you're going to do that?
So,
What are the benefits?
okay, so the question was, for those of you online here, about kind of when you'd use prescribed fire. First of all, you'd probably be using fire as a management tool to maybe manage, vegetation, right? Not necessarily as reducing fuel loads. So that would all be like classic, like what are your objectives? What are you trying to accomplish? What season is best to achieve that? I always thought, I do, I've done prescribed fires before. I thought, if I lived out in a ranch, I'd have that I'd be prepared so that if a fire was coming, I could, do probably a small prescribed burn on my ranch, right around the home site, so that fuel would be gone, and I'd sort of create a safe zone. So maybe, we are going to stay and weather out this fire. We've done all these things. We've got the insurance, but we've reduced the fuel loads. We've done this prescribed fire. We're going to have to deal with embers. The home may burn up behind us, but we've done everything we can, but you'd have a good chance. So sort of two different questions. If you're using prescribed fire to reduce the fuel loads, again, probably going to be doing that in the spring. You got to watch out for burn bans. Sometimes those burn bans, this year in Mora County, had a burn ban in January. And it's like, we wanted to do a burn up there in March, or actually even in May, and they're like, the burn ban was still on. So different counties are tricky here. In Torrance County often does a burn ban pretty early, whereas Lincoln County doesn't. So, talk to your county. But again, more often than not, you're probably using fire as a tool to manage the vegetation, and also maybe to reduce some of the, it's pretty hard to reduce pinyon juniper with fire safely, but you maybe use fire as a maintenance tool, which keeps your fuel loads reduced, so that when you do have a fire, it's maybe you have not quite so many pinyon juniper.
So as a resource though, so they decide to put that in their management plan. They're not like Kansas where they burn them every year and they're trained how to do it, and the guys on the ranch do it. But so since that's not a normal practice here, who should they work with to do this?
So the question was, like, who could you work with if you don't have the expertise and you want to utilize fire? That's kind of a hard one. In an emergency situation, that's not gonna work. But if it's from a management standpoint, NRCS has some EQIP type grants, and they can help you. We do a prescribed fire school every year. We've done one burn here, and we've done other burns around the state, where we go out on work with the landowner. It's sort of an extension opportunity. And Sid helped us in Roswell this year. A producer had had this drought, and he had alkali saccatone, and all that saccatone, the roots were in the water. So even though none of the blue graham was growing at all, in fact, we didn't really have to have any sort of fire line around it. But that was a situation where it was a training exercise. So there's opportunities to increase your knowledge base, NRCS, extension, maybe just getting together with your neighbors. Greg Moore is a classic one up in Mora County. He's done some burning. Sid Goodlow, south of here, has done some burning. So if there's a neighbor that you go burn on their land, and a lot of folks, where Marcy's talking about in Kansas, Oklahoma, Nebraska, they have burn associations. So like we all get together and pool our equipment, so that maybe we buy one pumper, and each year we burn a different ranch each year, and we gain knowledge. That way we're all in it together. So that a burn association is one way to approach prescribed fire. It's not an easy tool to use. An axe, the axe or the sprayer, so to speak, those are easy to start and stop. But a fire, obviously once you get that started, and if it goes wrong, it's a challenge. So it definitely challenged using prescribed fire, certainly in New Mexico. Yeah, so I can't really, other than if you go online and Google that, I looked at that page the other day. There's some folks, I think in Oklahoma and Kansas, that are applying for that right now. They lost quite a bit of livestock in some of those fires this spring. It's pretty, I think, narrow. You got about 30 days to get that done. Right. Yeah. So you've had a loss. Right. So you've lost livestock. I think even livestock. Right. Could be sheep. Actually, I don't know about sheep and goats. Certainly livestock. I think horses. Kind of got to read the fine print. But it's after the fire. You've had loss, and you got to get on that right away. I think you got 30 days to get your application in, and then I think another 30 days, and they'll pay it out or something. But it's just one of those government programs. USDA, it has become kind of a nexus, if you're familiar with that kind of term and those challenges. But it's probably I don't have any experience with it, but it seems like if you've lost a herd and you don't have any, in sort of a secondary rider to cover your livestock, it may be a valuable or useful tool.
They usually don't pay the full, depends on pool that's available, but its average is like 70%.
Yeah, that's right. I think it pays 70 or 75% of that animal. So it's better than nothing. Indeed, they just put out a grant last year. There's of all the EQIP grants that NRCS does, and particularly in the West, certainly in New Mexico, they hardly have anybody doing prescribed fire, and there's a good reason for that, but they're looking to find more willing and able folks to be interested in using fire. think maybe you had a question.
Yes. Doing a prescribed fire around high voltage transmission lines, what are the dangers of that?
So the question was, indeed, you have a high voltage transmission line, and indeed, and you're doing a prescribed fire, and you can get arcing. The smoke can conduct electricity, right? It can be a conduit to ground, right? Just like if you were to grab that, it'd be a conduit to ground, and the smoke there's enough particles in there that it can arc. So it's something you have to be careful about. The higher the voltage, definitely the more concern. And even if, on a lower sort of phase, lower current line, the risk is reduced. But it's definitely something you want to be, from a safety standpoint, if you get your crews out there and they're below that line and suddenly it's arcing, it's something you want to take into account. When we did this fire out there at Roswell, they had just a line coming to the house, nothing serious, but it's a wood pole, so we cleared the fuel around that. We used a weed eater and cleared around that, and then we kind of used a backfire around that, so we weren't putting up when you light the head fire and it's putting off that massive column of smoke, you wouldn't want to have that on that power line. So definitely something to think about. All right, I'll be around through lunch, and it's lunchtime, so appreciate your attention. Thanks.